Is it on now? Oh.
Hi,
Hello,
I'm Braxton,
I'm Zach
and we are
from
Old to New.
Now today we're going to be focusing on a cult classic film, which this is actually my first time watching, but this is his multiple
Time watching.
The Evil Dead, directed by Sam Raimi.
Released in 1981, starring Bruce Campbell.
Now I thought this would be a great pick for today because, as we've heard, Sam Raimi has now been asked to direct Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness 2, which are many calling a Marvel horror film. So I thought we'd delve into some of Sam Raimi's work. Now we're familiar with his work in Marvel, so this is the first time exploring his horror aspect.
And Bruce Campbell is also set to make an appearance in the new Doctor Strange, I believe.
Maybe even as Ash from The Evil Dead. Who knows?
Although
that'd be that'd be freaking awesome if that happened.
Yeah. So let's dive into The Evil Dead.
Okay. Now we start in just like they're in the woods, driving up to the cabin. While I see some unforeseen force following them through the woods.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, just on their way to the cabin, they start to just experience bizarre things, such as like accidentally getting into the wrong lane, but they also weren't paying attention.
Yeah.
The wheel snatches out of their hands, and
also the bridge nearly collapsing as they drive over it.
Yeah.
Personally, if I saw that bridge, I'm like, I'm not crossing that.
Yeah.
And from you wrote down that you thought it was low budget filmmaking at its best.
Yes, this is like Sam Raimi's first movie, or this is his first feature length picture, if I'm not mistaken. They did a short film that was they did a short film to get the money for this movie, and so this was just Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell, just two college buddies trying to make a horror movie.
Yeah. So like now we get there, they end up at the cabin with it's just very ominous. It's a cabin in the middle of the woods. I also thought one great thing was as they show up to the cabin, you just hear the banging of the thing of
the swing. Yeah.
I thought and that sounded like classic horror movies, like dun, dun.
Yeah, it's
dun.
very ominous, and like you can tell right away that they're all like kind of like sketchy about or nervous about going up to this cabin. Once they get there, they're already kind of like no. But then they open the door and they're ready to go in and
like
party and have a good time.
Yeah, and like I noticed like a lot of them was just like I noticed lots of POV and close-up shots. Like
yes,
like you see it from the point of view of like this unforeseen spectral force.
Yeah, there's this evil. It's the evil in the forest that you see from time to time, and each time you see it, it gets closer and closer to the cabin.
Yeah, and also you kind of see close up. You like close up every time like there's like a tense scene. You see him closing up on the person's face. That way you can kind of get an understanding of what they're going through.
Yeah, and it's very good at setting up suspense and building it, and you know something, you think something's going to happen, and sometimes it doesn't, and then sometimes stuff just comes out of nowhere.
Showing kind of like Sam Raimi kind of has a reliance on the jump scare.
Yeah.
And I also wrote down like you could see kind of like his natural camera shaking moves, showing there was like a lot of
Yeah, this, like we said at the beginning, this was low budget, so this is kind of one of their first features, so the whole filmmaking aspect hasn't quite been perfected yet,
Yeah.
but it's got that certain charm to it that makes it enjoyable.
Yeah. And as we go through, one of them starts having like a Fed starts drawing like this evil book, noticing the clock has stopped completely.
Yeah, and it's just very like strange and ominous, and they're all like confused, like what is this and what's going on.
Yeah. And eventually, like they notice, the cellar just pops right open,
and they for some reason decide to go check it out instead of just locking it up.
Yeah, and then they find shotguns, bullets, a tape recorder, and this evil book full of like ancient ruins,
and this strange dagger, and they all kind of they're just like, oh, this is cool stuff. Let's bring this up and check it out.
Honestly, that was me. I'm like, I'm not bringing this stuff up here. There's a book here with evil three. I'm thinking this is satanic. Let's just get rid of this thing.
Yeah.
You also pointed out there was like a Hills Have Eyes poster.
Yes, there's a torn up Hills Have Eyes poster, which was a popular horror movie from the 70s, directed by Wes Craven, and that was kind of neat to see that in this movie. It's torn up.
Yeah. And once they go back up, they start listening to the tape recordings, finding out that a college professor or an archaeologist was studying ancient ruins with his wife, where they notice some worshiping guides for this demon, the Sumerian demon, and they end up start reading passages from the book.
And accidentally awaken this evil spirit that starts possessing each of the friends one by one.
And one thing I noticed, like during each of those scenes, you always kept shifting. Like there's one scene, the moon would be like a light, whitish color, but then it would shift into a more like red or yellowish color.
Yeah.
I think it kind of like shifts, like the shifting tones that each character kind of like goes through. Like 1 minute, like everything's all calm and and then suddenly, boom, all deadly and frightening.
And the demons in this movie are very tricky, and they like to play. It's not only bloody and gory mess, but it's also psychological horror at the same time.
Yeah, at some points in the movie, I found myself questioning, at what point is this like the demons messing with him, or at what point is this just his own mind snapping?
Yeah.
And so I also noticed that there was a lot of following shots similar to Friday the 13th.
Yeah, this is 1981. This is right after the first Friday the 13th, maybe the second one, and a lot of movies were kind of like taking things from each other. So that actually was probably an aspect Sam Raimi took from Friday the 13th, was all the camera shots, or it could have just been coincidence, but it's very similar.
And now everything starts going crazy. I mean, one of them starts hearing voices, decides to go outside and check things out, where she is immediately attacked by the trees in the woods.
And she eventually escapes and makes it back to the cabin, and she's just ready to get out of there. She's like, I'm not staying here any longer.
Honestly, she's smart. It's like, after what just happened, like after what happened to me out there, I am not staying here. Let's get the heck out of here.
Yeah, and so Ash decides to take her back when they find out that the bridge has been destroyed.
Yeah. So they have no choice but to stay the night, where eventually she gets taken over by this demon.
Yes.
And they end up wounding Ash's girlfriend, and they end up having to lock her in the cellar.
Yes. And this is the point where, from here on out, it's just completely insane for the rest of the movie.
Eventually, his friend, Doug's girlfriend, becomes possessed by the demon as well, and they end up fighting against her. They end up trying various things to try to stop her. Eventually, they discover that stabbing with the dagger will slow them down, but not completely kill them.
And so Ash is then listening to the tape to find out, what else is on there, and the tape says that the only way to stop these people possessed by the spirit of the book is through bodily dismemberment.
Basically, so just cutting out the body into pieces to make sure they can't move.
Yeah.
So eventually they do stop Doug's girlfriend, and they end up having to bury her in the yard. Which I kind of feel like, at that moment, if you come back from that, how are you going to explain that? Okay, so you mean to tell me that a demon possessed half the people here, and you had to kill them to defend yourself?
Yeah.
At that point, it's like, you might as well just be asking for the insanity defense.
Yeah.
So, eventually, eventually, Doug's like, okay, dude, after this, I'm getting out of here. He just decides, I'm going to walk into the middle of the woods and just go to, which is straight up a no-no in terms of horror movie rules. You never split up and you never go out into the woods at night.
Yeah, so then leaves, and then
Oh, it's Scott. That was Doug.
it is Scott.
Oh.
So Scott leaves, and then Ash is kind of by himself for a little bit, and then he's looking around and he's trying to make sure he's safe, and then Scott just comes out of nowhere, and he's scratched up and bloody, and he's telling Ash it's not gonna let us leave.
Yeah. And so eventually, like, everything starts going crazy. Ash's girlfriend becomes possessed now, and Ash wants to kill her, but again, they start employing the psychological torture by
And he can't do it, even though Scott is telling him to kill her.
I have to say, you wrote down there was like pretty good gore effects and stunt work.
Yeah, this is practically a splatter movie. This a lot of very popular directors such as Sam Raimi and Peter Jackson, who did Lord of the Rings, got their start in like horror movies and like splatter movies, and that's what they were well known for before they started doing big budget action movies that eventually progressed their careers.
And so, when I watched these scenes, I felt like there was a ton of overkill, like way too much overkill.
Yeah, this movie's definitely over the top with the violence in it.
And so eventually, after finally he tries to take his girlfriend out to the shed to cut her up, but he still can't do it. So he just decides to bury her instead.
Where she then attacks him, and in self-defense, he grabs a shovel and decapitates her.
And ends up with blood all over his face, which apparently into the next scene just completely disappears from his face.
Yes, that's a thing that has always bothered me about this movie, is that he goes back and forth from one scene, one shot being completely covered in blood, and then it cuts to something else, and then it cuts back to Ash, and he's like totally clean.
Again, that's also why I kind of felt like, at what point is this really happening, or is this just like something happening in his mind? But but then I also noticed, like, at the beginning, during the scene where, the girl starts, drawing the book, the clock stops at a certain time, and it stays at that time and in the same position throughout the movie until, like, it gets closer to the end where it starts moving again. Eventually, Scott, he ends up having to kill the girl, and he ends up having to kill Scott, who eventually turns into a zombie himself.
Yes, Scott, he gets back inside after all the stuff that happened outside, and then when he gets back in and closes the door and he thinks he's safe, Scott wakes up and is possessed and attacks Ash.
Eventually, Ash is starting to get overpowered until he notices that the book is burning and decides maybe then that could stop them.
Yes, so he has to figure out a way to get to the book, but Scott is still on top of him, clawing him and just like biting him and just doing all these horrible things to him, when Ash remembers the necklace that he gives his girlfriend earlier in the movie, and he uses it as kind of like a lasso almost to like drag the book closer, and then throws the book into the fire.
Speaking about, you talked about those inconsistency with that. I also noticed that while watching that scene, because in one scene it looked like the book was halfway burned already when he dragged it, but when he grabbed it and threw it in, it was completely full.
Yeah. And so he sets the book on fire, and then that's when Scott just like stops and like just slowly starts to decay in just the um
Kind of like in a Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Last Crusade kind of way.
yeah, kind of like lower budget, but like you just see like the flesh ripping open and stuff. And
I mean, talking about low budget, you said that in one scene you said they used cream corn as
yes, they use
plus.
um they use all sorts of like vegetables and stuff like that to make this movie with the effects, and it's it you it looks cheesy, but it also once you know like how low budget this movie was and what they were working with, it's also kind of creative in that aspect.
Eventually, morning dawns and Ash just starts walking away from the cabin, wanting to forget everything until eventually we see the unforeseen force moving towards the house, through the house, and eventually getting him.
Yes, and then that's where our movie ends.
Fading to black.
And so that was our review for The Evil Dead. So what would you give it?
In terms of like, I mean, as in terms of cult classicness, I give it an 8. But the practical effects, to me, I'm still as living as a modern person. I do like the cheesiness of the effects, for a 70s or 80s movie, and I still really enjoyed the storyline. So I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10. Yeah, I'd give it about an 8 or 8.5
Yeah.
out of 10. So that was our review for The Evil Dead. We hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next video.
See ya.
Bye.